announced today that we are featuring Francis Widdowson, who is from Mount Royal University and has worked with such issues such as residential schools and problems and reconciliation between the Canadian government and the tribal system. And today we're going to be talking about how Aborigination affects university curriculum and what kind of problems there might be in criticizing Native epistemology. And so today I'd just like to say that I would like to thank the people at Prison Media for filming this event, also Pangburn Philosophy for getting the word out there, and of course the Society of Academic Freedom and Scholarship for helping funding this event and making it possible. So to those people, thank you. I'd also like to say that I tried my best to invite all of the scholars and faculty here who would have been interested in this, mainly from the Aboriginal Studies and the Anthropology departments. Unfortunately, not so many of them could be here today or could respond to me, but I thought it would be prudent to reach out to them, including the First Nation Students Association. But unfortunately, we're just living in a time where people don't feel inclined to have their beliefs challenged. So without further ado, I'd like to thank Francis Widdowson for being here and enjoy this talk. Woo!
Thank you very much. I don't have a remote controlled clicker. I think that the teaching assistants take them because the batteries run out. So anyway, I'm just going to have to move over into the advanced at the keyboard. So thank you very much everyone for coming. I would have loved to have much more engagement and interaction with people who are supportive of indigenization. But as Nick was mentioning, that's quite a difficult thing to pull off, and I will be talking about that over the lecture. And in fact, I have tried many times at Mount Royal University to have interactions with my colleagues about indigenization, and it has been very difficult. So, before I begin, I just wanted to give another plug for the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. I actually am the coordinator for membership outreach of that organization. And organizations like that, and also the Students for Free Expression here, are very important organizations to have at universities today for the academy across the country, because I think we really are entering into a difficult time where you want to challenge ideas, you want to discuss things, yet you're finding at every turn, you're sort of told that's not a polite way to go about it, that isn't a celebration enough of various cultures, and we're going to find that the universities pretty soon, we're not really going to be able to have any kind of important discussions which are necessary to figure out how to live together, how us as human beings can live together in the world today, and we really need freedom of expression to be able to do that, and the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship is a very important organization in this regard. Okay, so I'm going to talk for about half an hour about indigenization. I have been involved in criticizing indigenization, first of the government in the Northwest Territories, and then at universities for about 20 years now. So I've been constantly making these arguments along with Albert Howard, who I write a great deal of material with as well. Sort of just trying to draw people's attention to some of the problems with this initiative. And it's a slow going, but all you can do is just put out your views and hope you can have some kind of interaction and maybe move things a little bit forward. So I'll give you a bit of a sense of what I'm going to talk about in the lecture. First of all, I want to just talk briefly about open inquiry in universities and how this is under threat very much today in universities, and some of the problems generally with freedom of inquiry. Then, university indigenization, many people probably don't even know what it is. You hear this about, indigenizing the university. What exactly does that mean? And I'll just give you a brief overview of what that consists of and the philosophy that's driving it. And then I'm going to get into some of the major problems that I see with indigenization. The main one being it being a threat to open inquiry. People often think that indigenization is just about, improving indigenous education. And who could be opposed to that? Everyone would like to see indigenous people doing better within the educational system, but indigenization means much more than that and has serious consequences for open inquiry. And then an offshoot of that, something which is becoming much more prominent lately, which is the land acknowledgements. And I just noticed this in the UBC the last couple of days. This has a lot of implications which people don't really understand, and it's going to have serious consequences for open inquiry. And I'm just going to specifically talk about that. And then really what the constraints on open inquiry, discussing indigenization, what it's actually hiding, which is a lot of substandard educational programs which are coming into existence because they really haven't been criticized. Almost all of these areas, everyone is just going with them, and there's no attempts to engage them critically, and so they have a lot of really problematic aspects for the educational system in general, and especially for Indigenous students. And that's the thing I want to keep on emphasizing, is that this is supposed to help Indigenous people, indigenization. It won't do that. It's going to have the exact opposite effect, and that should be understood, is the detrimental effects on Indigenous education. And then finally, why is this happening? Why are all these efforts at indigenizing and to stop criticism of indigenization? And it's about money. There's lots of money that's involved in indigenization. And if these initiatives were criticized, that would then diminish the funds that are going to these indigenization initiatives. So I briefly want to talk about that sort of aspect of indigenization, the money behind it, and the kinds of processes that are involved in justifying increased money to indigenization initiatives. All right. So I'm going to just begin. If you have a question, since we have a small group here, if there's something that is unclear, or if you want to ask a question, feel free to just stop me. I think that might be a good way to go about doing it as well. And I should mention, at the top there, that is our actual strategic plan, our Indigenous strategic plan that Mount Royal University has adopted. And you can just look at this on the internet, Google, strategic plan Mount Royal University. You can sort of see the various aspects of it. Commitment to Indigenous education, that's what it starts out with. That sounds really good. Everyone's committed to Indigenous education. And then you get into sort of more questionable types of statements, which many people won't even know what these statements mean, such as, we recognize, value, and apply Indigenous knowledge, culturally responsive pedagogies and practices. Those kinds of statements, which is, well, what are these? What is Indigenous knowledge, and how does it differ from non-Indigenous knowledge? And what is a culturally responsive pedagogy? All these kinds of terms which are thrown out there, which is not very clear what they mean. And I go and I question people about them, and I'm just going to give you my thoughts on what is actually being proposed. Okay, so open inquiry in universities, okay, which is sort of the larger issue which is at stake here. So we have the smaller issue, which is university indigenization, but then we have a wider issue of open inquiry, which is under threat now at universities, not just in terms of discussing Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations, but anything to do with identity politics is very, very difficult. And then you have some other areas, you know, things like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Those kinds of areas, it's becoming more and more difficult to discuss these contentious issues on campus. And there was an interesting quote that, and actually it's an article that Richard Dawkins wrote on his website, and he had this, which I thought was quite a poignant quotation in that article, where he asked the question, are there kingdoms of emotion where logic is taboo, dare not show its face, zones where reason is too intimidated to speak? That's the question he asked. And I think indigenization, the study of indigenous peoples, the study of indigenous, non-indigenous relations, that is one of these zones where, you know, people are fearful. They haven't thought about why they think things are the way they are, but they're afraid to say this. And it's this is not the first time this quotation has been used in a presentation. And just to give you some idea, this is quite ironic, but my co-author, Albert Howard, was invited to speak at a roundtable in 2016 at the University of Calgary on indigenizing the university. And on the right-hand side is the poster that we had for that event. And it was an event that I had organized with my colleague, Liam Haggerty, who's a professor in Indigenous Studies. And we had talked for quite some time about, you know, getting different perspectives on indigenization together. Because what happened at Mount Royal was they just announced, I think it was in 2014, that we were going to indigenize the university. It hadn't been discussed at all. We hadn't even asked why we wanted to indigenize the university. It was just decided. And then so I spoke to people at the time saying, you know, we should really have some different viewpoints on this and you know, critical viewpoints so we know which way we're headed. They said, yes, that's a good idea, we'll do that. And then the whole next year, they just held events that were promotional for indigenization. So just basically trying to show how this was a good idea and not entertaining any critical perspective. So finally, I got my colleague Liam Haggerty to agree to do this roundtable at the University of Calgary. Albert Howard was one of the participants invited to speak, and he put this quotation at the beginning of this presentation. And he started talking about indigenous knowledge and indigenous ways of knowing, saying that they were irrational, and because of the spiritual beliefs that they contain within them, the assumptions, and therefore this way of knowing was actually a primitive way of knowing, by which he meant it was less developed. It was, so if we go back in history to our ancestors in terms of their ways of knowing, folk medicine, all these sorts of things, that would be a primitive way of knowing. Well, that did not go over very well at all, that statement. And these people in the room basically were acting as if they were going to stop him from speaking. There was almost a riot that happened. And fortunately things calmed down, and we were able to continue discussing indigenization, but it was very, very, you know, there was a lot of furor, and it was very, very difficult, people screaming from the audience, this sort of thing. And I thought, wow, here, the zones of emotion, you know, was it the zone where reason is too intimidated to speak? Most people would be very intimidated under those circumstances, facing that kind of hostile crowd, and not even being able to articulate what it is that you meant by what you're discussing. Anyway, after the event had happened, I sort of shook the hands of all the presenters, and it turned out that Liam Haggerty, Rob Innes, two of the participants, and Liam Haggerty was actually the moderator, were on social media for the entire event saying how racist the presenters were in this event. When this was just we were supposed to be colleagues that were discussing these matters. So, and that's just, you probably can't see that, but that was the, this is from the Twitter account of Liam Haggerty at the time, which he was actually tweeting out during Albert Howard's presentation, or during the actual proceedings, where he's He says, without a doubt, the most violent racist presentation I've ever witnessed. And then...
Sorry, I've got to ask that. Is it not seen like a Hitler speech or something? I mean, that's a very strong statement. I mean, what was this guy saying that he could be the most violent racist presentation I've ever witnessed? How does that even...
This is just what was said. I unfortunately, Liam Haggerty and I are no longer, we do not communicate except by me sending him out. Well, for example, I sent out an email saying I was going to be talking about all these people tonight, just so they were aware of it. But it's just like, this is the kind of thing that happens. This is the intimidation, is that to call someone a racist is a very, very serious charge to make that claim. And if you are called a racist, it makes you not want to say what you're saying. So most people are intimidated when they hear those kinds of charges, and they'll be nervous about saying what they think is true, if that's the case. On this side is Renee Watchman, another professor at Mount Royal University, who's in Indigenous studies as well. And she was responding to this and said, and something about my perspective in terms of my presentation, including Widdowson's perspective is problematic, hateful, ignorant, and generous of the host, which I don't quite know what she was meaning by the host there, but I think that's to do with the land acknowledgements of indigenous people who are the owners of the land, which is something I'm going to get to shortly. So this is the sort of thing that is happening on a regular basis when people are trying to put forward critical perspectives on indigenization. So in terms of this situation, and indigenization is just a part of it, I think it has something to do with what Mark Mercer from the Society of Academic Freedom and Scholarship, he's a philosophy professor at St. Mary's University, he calls sort of a disturbing culture of celebration that's on campuses. And that means that the university more and more, instead of encouraging disputation, encouraging people to challenge ideas, is saying we should really support various groups, and not even groups, that we should have wellness services and all these various sort of feel-good types of activities on campus. And that sounds like a really good thing on the surface, because you think, well, it's nice to celebrate things. Who wouldn't want to do that? But the problem is that sometimes celebration, clashes with various viewpoints, which could, to some extent, be critical of what it is a particular group or an individual is putting forward. And so you see things like, the gay pride flags and the trans flags, and you think, well, this is good that we're celebrating these cultures, but what happens if someone's undertaking research on things like the trans issues, which are occurring right now, which is a very, very controversial area? What those researchers might come up with might not be consistent with what the trans activists want to be put forward at the university, and that's when you encounter these difficulties. Is that you have the university now has almost a dual loyalty. One is sort of trying to have these truth-seeking initiatives. On the other hand, it wants to celebrate various cultures, and those things are sometimes contradictory with one another, and that's where the problem lies. The final thing I want to say about open inquiry at universities is often it concerns what I often hear when people are discussing the problem, which is it's those leftists that are a problem. Oh, it's the social justice warriors, this kind of terminology. And I think that's kind of misdiagnosing the problem, because you can have these tendencies that can occur across the political spectrum, either on the right or the left, and really what it is what's called politically correct totalitarianism. That's the problem, which is people who say, I'm right, this has been settled, and now this is going to be imposed upon everyone. And you better not react against it. You better just spout the party line. The Ministry of Truth is going to be coming down, and you've just got to absorb it. Yeah.
Professor, the question I would ask them, though, because I agree with you, it doesn't have to be right or left, right? But what's the root of politically correct totalitarianism if it's not agenda? And so what's it based in? Like, where does this come from? What's the soil out of which it grows?
I'm not sure about it. I think it's just, you know, you see that you have a chance to grab power, and you impose your ability to control things on others. Where this,
But to what end?
well,
So that's question. Is it part of a political theme? Do you think it's rooted? It's a loaded question in a way, but do you think it's rooted in Marxism, or is it rooted in a particular view of the world that they want to impose on us, or is it part of something to do with money?
well, certainly money is the fertile soil. So this is connected to
But it's
resource distribution. But just to give you an example of one of the most famous cases of what would be called politically correct totalitarianism was the Catholic Church in, a couple hundred years ago. There was a pope, and he put forward a saying which was called, "Error has no rights." So if you're in error, you've just forfeited all your rights. And the idea is that, the Catholic religion is the only religion, it's the right religion. Anyone who's not a Catholic, you don't get to say anything because you're obviously in the wrong because you're not a Catholic. And so religion was typically the thing that was the source of this, because what would happen is that, you sort of had this divine, God wants us to do this, and that was how it was used. Now it's not got this supernatural kind of backing, but it's really got the morality, the idea that the people who are trying to impose this see themselves as being morally superior to other people, and therefore they feel justified in imposing their views on everyone because they say this is going to be the beneficial result.
I was just curious, how would you diagnose, between a case where somebody is just being politically correct totalitarian, and one in which one has genuine moral convictions that are very strongly felt? Is there a way to distinguish between someone who's conducting themselves as a totalitarian and someone who's conducting themselves as someone who's passionately indignant?
Well, we don't want to prevent people from being passionately indignant. Right? People should be passionately indignant. The problem happens when you say that my view should just be imposed, and there's not going to be any freedom of expression, freedom of interaction about that. So I think that's the problem, is sort of the idea that this is the right way to think about something, the matter's closed, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Really, nothing should be like that. There should be nothing where you say we don't need to talk about this anymore. And if people are saying that, that's a totalitarian move which should be fought against.
I don't think that leftism has to function this way, but at the same time, I think it makes sense maybe to acknowledge that, as far as I can see at least, the current left, or some faux version of the left, what I would describe as the social justice left, is this thing that you're describing. That kind of identitarian left, yeah.
But I think it's a big mistake to...
Or identity politics, that's what it is.
Well, first of all, I don't think that identity politics are left-wing. I think identity politics are right-wing. Because identity politics are all about getting privileges for various groups. They're not about trying to develop some common basis from which we can all enter into society on equal terms. And if you look at left-wing politics, it used to be class politics. That's what left-wing politics was. Now class has got nothing to do with any of this stuff that we're talking about anymore. It's all about all these sorts of, to some extent, subjective kinds of identities where people are trying to get various resources, basically. And I see all my colleagues who call themselves left-wing people who are just demanding all sorts of privileges for their special
You're
groups.
the anomaly. See, that's the thing. You're the anomaly on the left.
No, but there's lots of left-wing people who are in favor of freedom of expression.
On the left.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yes. It's just that there's these politically correct totalitarians who tend to see themselves as left-wing these days, or at least call themselves left-wing. That's the problem.
Does the horseshoe, the confusion here is that because horseshoe theory kind of explains some of this confusion or this
Well,
disagreement?
that's getting at the totalitarian
Yeah.
dimension. So
'Cause some of
it's
the
like, you know,
left-wing
are you
people-
for equality and are you for, you know, freedom of lifestyle expression, sort of liberal views, or are you someone who is a totalitarian and you want to impose that through totalitarian measures?
Because if you're talking about equality, you want equality, you find some group, whatever you want to say, whether it's class-based or race-based, whatever you want to say, and they're below, you can statistically show whatever they've got harm their race in the community, they don't earn as much, or whatever metric you want to say, then you could justify special privileges to them to bring them back up to equality.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's like a horseshoe
Yeah, but it's
theory
weird
thing.
how you come at it though. Like, this is what's happening with the so-called social justice people, etc., is they don't want to change the economics. They want to get the proportionate representation in the existing hierarchical system. So they say there's 7% of Indigenous people in Alberta, 7% of the, you know, people on boards of directors, 7% of this, they should all be Indigenous. But that's not going to change the wealth differentials. It's just going to put the different groups in the different wealth differentials. And so class politics is about...
Is that not the same thing? I think I missed a step there. If you make sure that everyone's equally represented in all things, and not just at the top but in the bottom too, like
Yeah.
equal numbers of garbage men and whatever else,
Yeah.
you know, then isn't by definition, haven't you made it equal between the groups?
Yeah, but then if you're looking at class politics, it's not, the economics is the factor. Not whether you're a woman or a man, or whether you're a gay or straight or trans or cis or all these different categories. It's economically.
But they use the category. So the way I think what's very popular, especially with sort of free speech folks and people who follow like Jordan Peterson and that kind of crowd,
Yeah.
it's very rough understanding. I think we're still trying to figure out what's going on. But the popular understanding seems to be that the left used to be similar to what you described, and I relate to some of that. But that especially once communism started turning out to be a horrific nightmare, that was not feasible. That some of those theorists that you should talk about, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and some of that stuff, they flipped that over into identity politics type stuff and just kept on moving. And so where I connect with what you're saying is that it is absolutely about redistribution of wealth and income, but they're justifying that based on identity groups and claiming that certain identity groups are disadvantaged or oppressed, and so therefore underrepresented, and therefore we need to have, you know, quotas or whatever to put those in. I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily fix the whole system from the leftist perspective in terms of income inequality or whatever, but they don't care about that.
Yeah,
the main point is siphoning the money into the groups that are perceived under this new paradigm as being disadvantaged.
It's like what's called, this is why we get to indigenization, rent seeking based upon identity, which does nothing to alter the inequalities in society as a whole. It just shifts around the different groups in terms of their various positions.
I agree with that, but the thing they care about it is about those groups that are supposedly oppressed, and it does really shift the money there, right?
Well, sometimes it just exacerbates inequalities, right? This is what we see with indigenous politics, is that, you know, all the various rent-seeking initiatives actually are, enriching the privileged, what I call the Neotribal elite.
Interesting.
They're not doing anything to help the marginalized members of indigenous communities in Attawapiskat and Saskatchewan. So, the top hand, the top corner is the president of Mount Royal University, David Doherty, and this is an example of why administrators want to get into indigenization. which is it's very good public relations for university administrators. And David Doherty is not very popular at Mount Royal for a number of reasons, and so this was a way to get, get good public relations. And and his term wasn't renewed, so there was almost a non-confidence vote against him, and he had to just have one more year, and then now he's off to Brandon University. Anyway, so during this ceremony, they gave him a name, and the name was an Indigenous name, Wise Leader. And a lot of people at Mount Royal had a lot, took issue with that name that he was given. But that's an example of what administrators are involved in and how it's a good way to increase their stature in the community and so on. Okay, so in terms of what this is, if you look at Wikipedia, which is the authoritative source these days, it says the act of making something more native. And so that raises the question, okay, well, what does that mean? So you want to take the university, which has particular requirements, particular culture, and so on, and you want to sort of infuse that with indigenous things, indigenous culture, indigenous ceremonies, and so on and so forth. So it's basically about sort of incorporating indigenous elements throughout the university. That's the nature of indigenization. And it essentially would be considered to be what we call a diversity initiative, which is connected to what's called the politics of identity and entitlement. So identity politics, which probably some of you are familiar with, which is the idea that certain groups in society have been subordinated there. They've been demeaned, their identities have been swept to the side, they haven't been given proper recognition. And so to deal with the situation, to right the situation, there should be more recognition of various subordinate identities. That's the nature of identity politics. There's a great book on women's studies and identity politics, Daphne Patai and Noretta Cortez, I believe her name is, and they said it's interesting that identity politics, IPOL, also is correlated with ideological policing. So identity politics, at the same time as it's saying that the subordinate groups should be recognized, that comes with it. You better watch what you say. You could say something that could, insult a subordinating group, and who are you to speak anyway, since you're one of the dominant members of society. These kinds of things, and diversity is wound up with identity politics in those senses. And coming out of this initiative are basically three elements of indigenization. First of all, increasing the amount of indigenous content in people, and this really started in the 60s and the 70s. It was realized that the history department didn't have any courses on indigenous history. The political science department didn't have any courses on indigenous politics, these sorts of things, and things were done about that. There was changes that were made in the content, and then the people is that the numbers of indigenous students and faculty are small, or relatively small, disproportionate to the percentage of the population. And so this started quite relatively recently on a number of targeting initiatives that where you would reserve a certain number of spaces for indigenous students. And really the indigenous content, there's nothing if that's going to be proposed, there's nothing wrong with that. If there's courses that need to be added, the targeting, of course, raises questions because in the case of Aboriginal people in Alberta, the educational levels are very low. So if you want to get proportionate representation and you're going to reserve these seats for Indigenous students, it means that more qualified students won't be able to get in because those seats are going to be reserved for Indigenous students. And then you worry as well about, students coming into the system who aren't very well prepared for the academic environment. So that's a bit of a difficulty in the sense that, why aren't we correcting the problems of Indigenous education in the primary schools and the secondary schools? Why are we trying to artificially change things at the post-secondary level? But still, the content, that's something that is not a problem. The increasing number of Indigenous students and faculty, sure, that sounds great as long as it's done in terms of maintaining the qualifications of both students and faculty. Then we get into two of the more problematic aspects of indigenization, which are the symbolic recognition aspect, which, at some levels there's no problem with that. I was just walking around UBC today, you see all sorts of Aboriginal artwork everywhere. That's great. Indigenous people's artwork should be part of the university environment just like all other cultures' environments, part of the university environment. Maybe probably more so, because it's more connected with Vancouver and British Columbia and so on. So that makes total sense. But then we have other things which are going on which are much more disturbing, such as the prayers being held at all the events to do with Indigenous people, which is, and I've tried to push back against this in a big way at Mount Royal. They're saying, look, people shouldn't be making assumptions about people like this. Indigenous people can be atheists just like anyone could be an atheist or have another religion. Why are you making this assumption that just because this person's Indigenous, they must have some kind of particular belief in the supernatural?
That's what I was going to ask earlier on, because it goes back to the question we had beforehand. Whether or not what we're actually experiencing is the imposition of a new philosophy to replace the pre-existing philosophy that is a dismantling of the Christian West, a dismantling of the understanding that we had up until about the year 2000, and the creation of a new orthodoxy that transcends politics. That is something that we must believe in and buy into. It's going to color everything. In the same way that you can't understand a cathedral unless you understand the culture that built the cathedral. We're now jettisoning that culture. We're imposing a new set of beliefs to create a new culture, and this is all part of the neo-orthodoxy. That's what this sounds like. That sounds like a shift in world perspective. Because what we're talking about here is happening also in Australia and New Zealand, and even back in the United Kingdom. It's happening in Scotland and Wales and Ireland. This idea of saying that our past no longer is relevant. We have a new Indigenous future, and that means there's no place for the old. It has to be now a new way of thinking. Is that what we're seeing? Because that's what I'm hearing. And this is kind of a specialty of mine, right? So.
Yeah, well, I know certainly with the crumbling of the religion and the religious basis of society sort of created a bit of a vacuum. And so people are kind of searching for things. And I think the identity politics stuff kind of is sort of being inserted in there as, although the belief in the supernatural is not involved, it's got certain, dogmatic kinds of demands, so to speak.
Well, sir, I just wanted, because there's a point that you made that I think is really important, is that from my perspective, of course, I have certain views on the nature of things mystical, spiritual, whatever, right? But I would never, and in my teaching career, I never would have imposed my personal religious views on any group of people that I was teaching. It simply wouldn't have been done, right? In the same way to say that you as a socialist are going to have some particular world point of view, when you're talking about a system of economics that's divorced from anything spiritual. So my question is, when you have a functionally agnostic or irreligious society, why would you bring prayer into it? What is this about? Because you've got atheists, you've got agnostics, you've got faithful Catholics, you've got Orthodox Jews, who are all going to be offended by this. Why cause offense?
Yeah, well, I think it's just a ridiculous stereotype, you know. Indigenous people,
So we're dealing
indigenous
with
people like to
so we're
break.
dealing with an ignorant cartoon.
Yeah, and it has a long history in,
So it's tokenism.
yeah, and it's sort of the you know, the spiritual indigenous person, that kind of stereotype, I think is very, you know, is very deeply embedded within sort of European society. So that's kind of the difficulty is saying, look, you know, an indigenous person is not a mascot. They're an individual just like everyone else, and you shouldn't be making these assumptions. And if you made a stereotype about anyone else, like indigenous people have stereotypes that are developed, that are, you know, made up in universities, that would be considered to be very, very offensive. And I think that's sort of the difficulty, and part of the problem is because of this intimidation that's happening, people just go, well, I don't think I should say anything because I don't want to say the wrong thing. You know, things kind of are sort of spiraling out of control without being checked by critical thinking. The final area, and this is the most serious of all, is the, you know, and this is, I showed you the strategic plan at the beginning, is that it's sort of saying that, you know, that you must value, you must respect, and you must value this indigenous ways of knowing. And this is the big question. You know, there's been some people in Mount Royal, including myself, have just been asking this. What are you talking about here? What is this indigenous ways of knowing? And I went to a number of some consultation sessions when we didn't decide we were going to do this. And Jim Zimmer, who is the head of indigenization at Mount Royal, so he's sitting at a table, and I'm there, and I'm asking him questions. I'm saying, well, what is this? What are you talking about? What is this indigenous ways of knowing? How does that differ from non-indigenous ways of knowing? You know, what is it? You know, what's the difference? He said, that's a very good question. Why are we doing this? We don't know what we're doing. You know, so it just shows you a little bit. It's just sort of the public relations side of things again. And I'm gonna, you know, and then there's the value. You know, how can they? And again, you know, how can the university tell us to value anything? We're at a university to try to determine what we should value. That's what we should be doing at the university, not having the Ministry of Truth say, thou shalt value X, which is, you know, what is happening with this. So this is a big problem, and I'm going to get to this at the end, is it has, you know, because the ways of knowing are less developed than the scientific method and other forms of, you know, methods have been developed to understand the nature of the universe, it's going to have detrimental effects on the educational system. That's a big problem. But because we're intimidated, we can't challenge it, and this is going to cause further problems down the road. Okay, and that's the intersectionality workshop that I went on. All the different identity politics running amok with all the identities and intersectional relationships. Okay, so the quote from Dawkins about reason being too intimidated to speak, this has happened. And many people have certain questions that don't quite know, they don't really understand this, they're trying to figure it out, but they're really afraid to ask questions. And there's a bunch of documents that I just kind of, I know it's a bit of a blur here, but I just wanted to have them for reference. From some of the strategic plans and developments of the strategic plans. And they kind of indicate a little bit the sort of the mentality that is drawing up these strategic plans. So the first thing is that you hear about is that, you know, indigenization is, we should be doing it, and we didn't have a debate about it all, we just decided, because by indigenizing we will overcome oppression and improve education. Those were the claims that were being made. And in terms of the first point about the overcoming oppression and improving education, the legacy that will prevail over the legacy of colonization, that sort of language, is done like two kinds of moves that are made. The first one is that there's a tendency to confuse respect for people with respect for ideas. Like, so that's kind of conflated. So sort of if an Indigenous person says something that you think is invalid, what they're trying to say is that if you question that, you're somehow denigrating that person. That's sort of the message that's been put forward. And the second thing, the second thing is the terms are never defined. So it's always quite fuzzy as to what you're talking about. So that's what kind of allows people to think, okay, yes, we're going to overcome oppression and improve education, because those two things are constantly happening in indigenization.
It's something that bugs me generally in any discourse. So the word racist, in one of your first slides, they calling that speaker whose name I forget, racist. Most of the time when they say racist, I think they mean bigot, because, for example, if someone criticises Islam, they say they're racist. Well, Islam is a set of ideas. It's not. Yeah. There's people of all races in Islam. All you got to do is be accepted into the group. Yeah. And so I feel like as a general sort of, they're just going for a word that sounds the worst to just sort of just throw them out.
And I think that this idea of respect, you do hear this a lot. It's like we want to have a respectful environment and so on. And that sort of means to me that, people shouldn't belittle people, they shouldn't, discriminate against them, they should act, in a fashion that is, courteous, that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that if that person makes an argument that you disagree with, that you should not say anything. But they're sort of implying that, and in fact, I think that it's very disrespectful not to argue with people that you disagree with them. And I find it's very patronizing, the types of things that are being put forward is that, if an Indigenous person says something you disagree with, you should just agree with them, or certainly don't disagree, because that's disrespectful. Well, it seems to me that's disrespectful not to treat them like another human being, who you say, hey, I don't agree with you about that. And if you don't do that, then there's no way that any kind of learning process can happen between people. So I think that's a massive confusion that has enabled this whole idea that indigenization is somehow going to overcome oppression to come into existence. As well, you will notice in the literature that people who support indigenization are characterized as allies of Indigenous people. That means that if you're a critic of indigenization, you're the opposite of an ally, which I believe is an enemy. You're going to be the opposite of an ally. And when I first got the draft of the Indigenous Strategic Plan, it's not in the current one, but it was sort of at the back of it had this, how are we going to get this thing through? Well, there's things that will enable it now to come into existence, and then there's barriers to it. And I noticed at the end of it was the barriers to indigenization are strong and active individual opposition by MRU community members, not all university community members. And so I was going, so I'm just, my argument is something I'm just going to be, I'm a barrier who's just going to be got out of the way here. So we can get through, not hate. What are the objections and skepticism? Maybe we should just investigate this. This is just seen as a problem that's got to be dealt with somehow.
Why didn't they just put Francis Widdowson on the barrier list?
Anyway, and so then, and then you get all the accusations again happening. And this is my colleague, Michael Trissello, who, when I was going to speak at Laurier, given the same talk as tonight, it's slightly different. This has been updated, but he wrote on his Twitter account, pathetic racist Francis Widdowson apparently wants to associate with white supremacists at Wilfrid Laurier University. So anyway, so I sent him an email saying, I just noticed that you said that I was a pathetic racist, There's two reasons why you're doing this. Either you are trying to smear either you don't understand what you're talking about, you haven't read any of my work, so you just are misinformed, in which case you should, go and read some of the actual work that I've done and so on. Or you're trying to smear my reputation. That's the two things. So anyway, so then he wrote an email back, and I CC'd this to all the dean and the president and everyone, just to let everyone know. And he said that I was a bully, and I was trying to bully him, and I was going to sick old Jordan Peterson's Twitter poll. And I said, are you kidding me? I'm just telling you I'm going to be talking about you, and you should maybe be concerned about this a little bit if you're just going to be, calling people these very serious charges, and maybe you should get some evidence to back up your claim. So that's the sort of thing that's happening. Even more disturbing is what was then the president of the Students Association, who as well was sending out things like I was a poor educator, Mount Royal deserved better educators than me, and the Students Association often, they used to be in favor of freedom of expression, and now I suspect, I don't have evidence of this, or I just have anecdotal evidence of this, that the students and these advocacy-oriented professors are interacting quite closely, and the students almost become proxies for these activist professors. I think there's an association, although I just have anecdotal evidence, and that's kind of a disturbing trend, is because you would hope that students would be sort of a bulwark against this kind of politically correct totalitarianism that we're seeing, but often students who get elected to the political wing often have quite a strong politically totalitarian bent, and that just creates even more difficulties in trying to do this. So, so this is all the reason, all these things are happening. People other professors see this happening, and they think, this is really a dangerous area to get involved in, and unless they're kind of emboldened, they'll just tend to take the easy way out and not really fight against what's happening. So this is definitely happening with respect to indigenization and other sort of identity politics. We don't know what we're doing or what it's about. The top hand, the top corner is the president of Mount Royal University, David Dougherty. And this is an example of why administrators want to get into indigenization, which is it's very good public relations for university administrators. And David Dougherty is not very popular at Mount Royal for a number of reasons, and so this was a way to get, get good public relations. And and his term wasn't renewed, so there was almost a non-confidence vote against him, and he just has one more year, and then now he's off to Brandon University. Anyway, so during this ceremony, they gave him a name, and the name was an indigenous name, Wise Leader. And a lot of people at Mount Royal had took issue with that name that he was given. But that's an example of what administrators are involved in and how it's a good way to increase their stature in the community and so on. Okay, so in terms of what this is, if you look at Wikipedia, which is the authoritative source these days, it says the act of making something more native. And so that raises the question, okay, well, what does that mean? So you want to take the university, which has particular requirements, particular culture, and so on, and you want to sort of infuse that with indigenous things, indigenous culture, indigenous ceremonies, and so on and so forth. So it's basically about sort of incorporating indigenous elements throughout the university. That's the nature of indigenization. And it essentially is would be considered to be what we call a diversity initiative, which is connected to what's called the politics of identity and entitlement. So identity politics, which probably some of you are familiar with, which is the idea that certain groups in society have been subordinated there. They've been demeaned, their identities have been swept to the side, they haven't been given proper recognition. And so to deal with the situation, to right the situation, there should be more recognition of various subordinate identities. That's the nature of identity politics. There's a great book on women's studies and identity politics, Daphne Fatai and Noretic Cortez, I believe her name is, and they said it's interesting that identity politics, IPOL, also is correlated with ideological policing. So identity politics at the same time as it's saying that the subordinate groups should be recognized, that comes with it. You better watch what you say. You could say something that could insult a subordinated group, and who are you to speak anyway since you're one of the dominant members of society. These kinds of things, and diversity is wound up with identity politics in those senses. And coming out of this initiative are basically three elements of indigenization. First of all, increasing the amount of indigenous content in people, and this really started in the 60s and the 70s. It was realized that the history department didn't have any courses on indigenous history. The political science department didn't have any courses on indigenous politics, these sorts of things, and things were done about that. There was changes that were made in the content, and then the people is that the numbers of indigenous students and faculty are small, or relatively small, and disproportionate to the percentage of the population. And so this started quite relatively recently, a number of targeting initiatives that where you would reserve a certain number of spaces for indigenous students. And really the indigenous content, there's nothing, if that's going to be proposed, there's nothing wrong with that. If there's courses that need to be added, the targeting, of course, raises questions because in the case of Aboriginal people in Alberta, the educational levels are very low. So if you want to get proportionate representation and you're going to reserve these seats for Indigenous students, it means that more qualified students will be able to get in because those seats are going to be reserved for Indigenous students. And then you worry as well about students coming into the system who aren't very well prepared for the academic environment. So that's a bit of a difficulty in the sense that why aren't we correcting the problems of Indigenous education in the primary schools and the secondary schools? Why are we trying to artificially change things at the post-secondary level? But still, the content, that's something that is not a problem. The increasing number of Indigenous students and faculty, sure, that sounds great as long as it's done in terms of maintaining the qualifications of both students and faculty. Then we get into two of the more problematic aspects of indigenization, which are the symbolic recognition aspect, which, at some levels there's no problem with that. I was just walking around UBC today, you see all sorts of Aboriginal artwork everywhere. That's great. Indigenous people's artwork should be part of the university environment just like all other cultures' environments, part of the university environment. Maybe probably more so, because it's more connected with Vancouver and British Columbia and so on. So that makes total sense. But then we have other things which are going on which are much more disturbing, such as the prayers being held at all the events to do with Indigenous people, which is you know, and I've tried to push back against this in a big way at Mount Royal. They're saying, look, that people shouldn't be making assumptions about people like this. Indigenous people can be atheists just like anyone could be an atheist or have another religion. Why are you making this assumption that just because this person's Indigenous, they must have some kind of particular belief in the supernatural?
That's what I was going to ask earlier on, because it goes back to the question we had beforehand. Whether or not what we're actually experiencing is the imposition of a new philosophy to replace the pre-existing philosophy that is a dismantling of the Christian West, a dismantling of the understanding that we had up until about the year 2000, and the creation of a new orthodoxy that transcends politics. That's something that we must believe in and buy into, that it's going to color everything. In the same way that you can't understand a cathedral unless you understand the culture that built the cathedral. We're now jettisoning that culture. We're imposing a new set of beliefs to create a new culture, and that this is all part of the neo-orthodoxy. That's what this sounds like. That sounds like a shift in world perspective. Because you can what we're talking about here is happening also in Australia and New Zealand, and even back in the United Kingdom. It's happening in Scotland and in Wales and Ireland. This idea of saying that our past no longer is relevant. We have a new indigenous future, and that means there's no place for the old. It has to be now a new way of thinking. Is that what we're seeing? Because that's what I'm hearing. And this is kind of a specialty of mine, right? So.
Yeah, well, I know certainly with the crumbling of religion and the religious basis of society, it sort of created a bit of a vacuum. And so people are kind of searching for things. And I think the identity politics stuff kind of is sort of being inserted in there as, you know, although the belief in the supernatural is not involved, it's got certain, you know, dogmatic kinds of demands, so to speak.
Well, sir, I just wanted, because it's a point that you made that I think is really important, is that from my perspective, of course, I have certain views on the nature of things mystical, spiritual, whatever, right? But I would never, and in my teaching career, I never would have imposed my personal religious views on any group of people that I was teaching. It simply wouldn't have been done, right? In the same way to say that you as a socialist are going to some particular world point of view, when you're talking about a system of economics that's divorced from anything spiritual. So my question is, when you have a functionally agnostic or irreligious society, why would you bring prayer into it? What is this about? Because you've got atheists, you've got agnostics, you've got faithful Catholics, you've got Orthodox Jews, who are all going to be offended by this. Why cause offense?
Yeah, well, I think it's just a ridiculous stereotype. You know, Indigenous people like to
So we're
pray.
dealing with an ignorant cartoon.
Yeah, and it has a long history in.
So it's tokenism.
Yeah, and it's sort of the you know, the spiritual Indigenous person, that kind of stereotype. I think is very, you know, is very deeply embedded within sort of European society. So that's kind of the difficulty is saying, look, you know, an Indigenous person is not a mascot. They're an individual just like everyone else, and you shouldn't be making these. And if you made a stereotype about anyone else, like Indigenous people have stereotypes that are developed, that are, you know, made up in universities, that would be considered to be very, very offensive. And I think that's sort of the difficulty, and part of the problem is because of this intimidation that's happening. People just go, well, I don't think I should say anything because I don't want to say the wrong thing. You know, things kind of are sort of spiraling out of control without being checked by critical thinking. The final area, and this is the most serious of all, is the, you know, and this is, I showed you the strategic plan at the beginning, is that it's sort of saying that, you know, that you must value, you must respect, and you must value this Indigenous ways of knowing. And this is a big question. You know, there's been some people now, including myself, have just been asking this. What are you talking about here? What is this Indigenous ways of knowing? And I went to a number of sort of consultation sessions when we decided we were going to do this. And Jim Zimmer, who is the head of indigenization at Mount Royal. So he's sitting at a table, and I'm there, and I'm asking him questions. I'm saying, well, what is this? What are you talking about? What is this indigenous ways of knowing? How does that differ from non-indigenous ways of knowing? You know, what is it? You know, what's the difference? He said, that's a very good question. Why are we doing this? We don't know what we're doing. You know, so it just shows you a little bit. It's just sort of the public relations side of things again. And I'm gonna, you know, and then there's the value. You know, how can they? And again, you know, how can the university tell us to value anything? We're at a university to try to determine what we should value. That's what we should be doing at the university, not having the Ministry of Truth say, thou shalt value X, which is, you know, what is happening with this. So this is a big problem, and I'm going to get to this at the end, is it has, you know, because the ways of knowing are less developed than the scientific method and other forms of, you know, methods that have been developed to understand the nature of the universe, it's going to have detrimental effects on the educational system. That's a big problem. But because we're intimidated, we can't challenge it, and this is going to cause further problems down the road. Okay, and that's the intersectionality workshop that I went on. All the different identity politics running amok with all the identities and intersectional relationships. Okay, so the quote from Dawkins about reason being too intimidated to speak, this has happened. And many people have certain questions that don't quite know, they don't really understand this, they're trying to figure it out, but they're really afraid to ask questions. And there's a bunch of documents that I just kind of, I know it's a bit of a blur here, but I just wanted to have them for reference. From some of the strategic plans and developments of the strategic plans. And they kind of indicate a little bit the sort of the mentality that is drawing up these strategic plans. So the first thing is that you hear about is that, you know, indigenization is, we should be doing it. And we didn't have a debate about it all, we just decided. Because by indigenizing, we will overcome oppression and improve education. Those were the claims that were being made. And in terms of the first point about the overcoming oppression and improving education, the legacy that will prevail over the legacy of colonization, that sort of language, is done by two kinds of moves that are made. The first one is that there's a tendency to confuse respect for people with respect for ideas. Like, so that's kind of conflated. So it's sort of if an indigenous person says something that you think is invalid, what they're trying to say is that if you question that, you're somehow denigrating that person. That's sort of the message that's been put forward. And the second thing, the second thing is the terms are never defined. So it's always quite fuzzy as to what you're talking about. So that's what kind of allows people to think, okay, yes, we're going to overcome oppression and improve education, because those two things are constantly happening in indigenization.
It's something that bugs me generally in any discourse. So the word racist, and in one of your first slides, they were calling that speaker, whose name I forget, a racist. Most of the time when they say racist, I think they mean bigot, because, for example, if someone criticises Islam, they'll say they're racist. Well, Islam is a set of ideas. It's not. Yeah. There's people of all races in Islam. All you got to do is be accepted into the group. Yeah. And so I feel like as a general sort of, they're just going to a word that sounds the worst to just throw them out.
And I think that this, this idea of respect, you do hear this a lot. It's like we want to have a respectful environment and so on. And that sort of means to me that, people should belittle people, they shouldn't, discriminate against them. They should act, in a fashion that is, courteous, that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that if that person makes an argument that you disagree with, that you should not say anything, right? But they're sort of implying that, and in fact, I think that it's very disrespectful not to argue with people that you disagree with. And I find it's very patronizing, the types of things that are being put forward is that, if an Indigenous person says something you disagree with, you should just agree with them, or certainly don't disagree, because that's disrespectful. Well, it seems to me that's disrespectful not to treat them like another human being, who you say, hey, I don't agree with you about that. And if you don't do that, then there's no way that any kind of learning process can happen between people. So I think that's a massive confusion that has enabled this whole idea that indigenization is somehow going to overcome oppression to come into existence. As well, you will notice in the literature that people who support indigenization are characterized as allies of Indigenous people. That means that if you're a critic of indigenization, you're the opposite of an ally, which I believe is an enemy. You're going to be the opposite of an ally. And when I first got the draft of the Indigenous Strategic Plan, it's not in the current one, but it was sort of at the back of it had this, how are we going to get this thing through? Well, there's things that will enable it now to come into existence, and then there's barriers to it. And I noticed at the end of it was the barriers to indigenization are strong and active individual opposition by MRU community members, not all university community members. And so I was going, so I'm just, I'm a barrier who's just going to be got out of the way here so we can get through, not hate. What are the objections and skepticism? Maybe we should just investigate this. This is just seen as a problem that's got to be dealt with somehow.
Why didn't they just put Francis Widdowson on the barrier list?
Anyway, and so then, and then you get all the accusations again happening. And this is my colleague, Michael Trissello, who, when I was going to speak at Laurier, given the same talk as tonight, it's slightly different. This has been updated, but he wrote on his Twitter account, pathetic racist Francis Widdowson apparently wants to associate with white supremacists at Wilfrid Laurier University. So anyway, so I sent him an email saying, I just noticed that you said that I was a pathetic racist. There's two reasons why you're doing this. Either you are trying to smear either you don't understand what you're talking about, you haven't read any of my work, so you just are misinformed, in which case you should, go and read some of the actual work that I've done and so on. Or you're trying to smear my reputation. That's the two things. So anyway, so then he wrote an email back, and I CC'd this to all the dean and the president and everyone, just to let everyone know. And he said that I was a bully, and I was trying to bully him, and I was going to sick old Jordan Peterson's Twitter followers. And I said, are you kidding me? I'm just telling you I'm going to be talking about you, and you should maybe be concerned about this a little bit if you're just going to be, calling people these very serious charges, and maybe you should get some evidence to back up your claim. So that's the sort of thing that's happening. Even more disturbing is what was then the president of the Students Association, who as well was sending out things like I was a poor educator, Mount Royal deserved better educators than me, and the Students Association often, they used to be in favor of freedom of expression, and now I suspect, I don't have evidence of this, or I just have anecdotal evidence of this, that the students and these advocacy-oriented professors are interacting quite closely, and the students almost become proxies for these activist professors. I think there's an association, although I just have anecdotal evidence, and that's kind of a disturbing trend, is because you would hope that students would be sort of a bulwark against this kind of politically correct totalitarianism that we're seeing, but often students who get elected to the political wing often have quite a strong politically totalitarian bent, and that just creates even more difficulties in trying to do this. So, so this is all the reason, all these things are happening. People see, other professors see this happening, and they think, oh, this is really a dangerous area to get involved in. And unless they're kind of emboldened, they'll just tend to take the easy way out and not really fight against what's happening. So this is definitely happening with respect to indigenization and other sort of identity politics stuff that's happening on campus and they're becoming more and more regular. At Mount Royal, this was last year, I guess, or maybe it was this year. Yeah, I guess it was this year. President of Mount Royal University, David Doherty, just announced at General Faculty's Council, which is the governance body for Mount Royal, that we were going to have land acknowledgements. And that we weren't going to discuss it, just going to be imposed, because it was the right thing to do. And I was very shocked at the time, because I thought, how do we know it's the right thing to do if we haven't discussed it? And that's the politically correct totalitarian maneuver that happens. And basically, he didn't want to discuss it because, if you discuss it, a few oppositional viewpoints could be expressed, and we certainly don't want that to happen at a university. That just would not be a very good thing to have. Contentious discussion to unfold in the body that's making decisions about what should be happening at Mount Royal University. So anyway, I got to think, and I hadn't really thought about land acknowledgements too much until that point. And I thought, I wonder what other people think, other professors think about the land acknowledgements. And I would ask them, and they would say, the Aboriginal people have been oppressed historically. It's a good thing to do. I think it's just a good thing to do. And, that's interesting. I wonder, what Indigenous people think about this. They have this. So I was looking at the Canadian Association of University Teachers website, and they actually have a territorial acknowledgements area that they've developed. And it's in it, and then they give you a link to another article, which is in Megaphone magazine, and I was reading that, and it was saying, well, if you do acknowledge the land, you're saying that you're agreeing that the land belongs to Indigenous people. I thought, wow, that's a totally different meaning from what most people think they're doing, because it's often just a symbolic gesture. Just say it at the beginning of the meeting, but the other thing too is that if you say it, it's got to be heartfelt. It can't just be throwing off a few sentences at the beginning of the meeting. So there's kind of these two separate universes that are developing about how people are thinking about this, and this is obviously going to create problems down the road, because some Indigenous people are going to be thinking that these non-Indigenous people are doing this. They're actually really have a heartfelt belief that the land belongs to Indigenous people, and this is a particular problem in universities, and this feeds into the open inquiry aspect, because, and this happened at that roundtable in 2016, is that when Albert Howard and I started to say things that were very critical of indigenization, this kind of crowd, this unruly crowd, was saying, "You be quiet. You're guests on the land of Indigenous people. How can you be saying things that you're a guest
conquered land, that's why.
That you're guests on it?
It's conquered land.
You're at a dinner party. If you're at a dinner party and you don't want to start saying critical things about your host." And I was saying to them, this is a university. University land does not belong to Indigenous people. It belongs to all of us. It's a public space, right? And we can all come here. I was just wandering around the university today, and I was just amazed what a public space it was, that we could all come and discuss things, and that's sort of the ideal of the university, not that, you know, a certain group has ownership over it and everyone's got to be worried about what they say because, you know, they're the controllers of it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because UBC especially boasts a lot of diversity as of our student body and all the international students that we have. And I've noticed throughout my education here that a lot of international students, they don't understand why we do land acknowledgements. But they kind of do it anyway, superficial. I wouldn't want to say superficially, maybe they do understand. But a lot of them don't really understand where it's coming from. And when they do these presentations, they're made to acknowledge these land acknowledgements, and they don't fully understand why, and there's no real inquiry on that. Because I've been here 5 years of my education now, and I have never really had a conversation with any of my professors so far on why we do these land acknowledgements. Are there any ways that international students can get involved, and so forth and so forth. So in a weird way, it is inclusive, but it is also excluding some people who don't feel like they are necessarily, you know, that they're paying to be here. Like they don't feel like they're.
Yeah, and it's, and it, you know, we should be at the university figuring out how to, you know, incorporate everyone into a common conversation. Right? That's sort of the important aspect, and not to say, oh, you are this group, and therefore, you know, you can't. We've got to be careful how we interact and that sort of idea. Yeah.
Here's another thing too. So far everybody's being very civilized, but this question I think I have to ask is that the word Cree means newcomer. And the Cree people only arrived in Manitoba, coming in through Ontario, maybe about 100, 150 years before the first French explorers came in. And they displaced the Blackfoot people that were living in those areas, especially around the Piegan River. My forebears are Piegan, Blackfoot, and we were moved out by the Cree Indians who came in. Now, my question would be, when we're talking about indigenous people, Cree aren't indigenous. They came from somewhere else. My people are earlier than the Cree. But would my people be welcome to come here to Musqueam, and are we guests on this land, even though we're by law considered to be indigenous? So my question is whether or not it's just purely racist, anti-white, or anti-Chinese, or anti-anything else. Because you see, if you start playing this game, and you start with nations, which nation's indigenous? Which people have a right to be here and don't have a right to be here? What are we talking about? Because we're asking about the exclusion of certain people now in what should be an inclusive and comprehensive society.
Well, so I kind of do agree that there's an anti-whiteness theme and that there does seem to be certain, it's not exactly a political ideology, I think it's deeper than that, but it seems to me like things like land acknowledgements really are a way to signify that you belong to the particular group or stream of thought. Because it seems to me like all of the things that are said by, let's say, the politically correct types don't really have any content. You know, when I was in elementary school, I actually learned about indigenous culture and I found it fascinating. But when we talk about land acknowledgements, you're not actually learning anything about, there's no content about indigenous people in it. It's just, yeah, and I feel like what we're trying to do here is to actually develop an understanding of a topic, but really it's just a signal. And so what I'm interested in knowing is what does it exactly mean for a land to belong to people? Because if UBC is so interested in, or believes so wholeheartedly that this land belongs to Native people, all they have to do is pack up their bags and leave. So the idea that I acknowledge that this land belongs to them doesn't mean I acknowledge that this land belongs to them. It means that I'm a part of a specific group of sort of thinking that's deeper than just political, maybe not as deep as religious, maybe deeper. But it feels like it's not really about the content, it's cryptic.
Yeah, well,
And
I
so
think
I was wondering,
two
what do you
words
think?
that have often been used is sort of what's called virtue signaling.
Something like that, yeah.
So by me doing this, you know, if I'm going to be having it shows that I'm sort of the right type of person who does these kinds of things, right? And we just have this at Mount Royal now. I went to a workshop a month ago. It's called Decolonizing the Syllabus. And so I go to all these events just to sort of see what the arguments are. And I said, well, you should put this on your course outline, the territorial acknowledgement. You should put that, and your syllabus will therefore be decolonized if you do that.
What does it mean? Because like I'm heavily involved with like sexual assault policy and controversies in that area, and I saw a poster a while back in Buchanan building, and it said something like decolonizing rape culture, and I'm like, wow! Now the idea is just smash it together, like the all of this movement, right? So what does it even mean when you say not specifically to that topic, but decolonizing?
Well, you strip all this is indigenization as you add the indigenous into it. Decolonizing as you rip the colonialist stuff out of it.
So no more English language.
It's where does it, everything is due to colonialism in Canada, really. Like, we are the products of colonialism. So really, it is, as you say, you're just gonna just burn it down. Burn it down, I think is the...
What do you mean by colonialization? Freedom of speech, contracts, all this other stuff that we get from the Magna Carta, universities. Huh? Universities. Yeah.
It's all just about getting, well, it's rent seeking. I'll come to that at the end. It's all about rent seeking, pretty much.
Renting?
Rent seeking. It's about gaining resources for yourself, for your group.
So one example of rent seeking, sort of easier says taxi licenses that rent seeking. So it's a privilege that the government grants you to basically collect money off the work of others.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at earlier was like how it's cryptic and that there isn't actually content is kind of, I guess, that rent seeking idea, because I was thinking, what does the land belongs to indigenous people actually mean? It actually means that UBC gets to put a large budget into buying totems. And it means that artists get to be paid large amounts of money to make totems. It doesn't mean anybody actually understands anything about native culture, or that native people get to come here and decide what happens with the land.
And the totem poles, the university wants to buy various artworks, like that's part of it. So it's not really a problem in that sense, right? Although you could argue that, a disproportionate amount of the budget is going to indigenous artworks, but it's really not this is not the issue. The problem is when, and it's the medallion. The medallion is the indigenous identity that you then divert resources to on that basis. And this is like all these indigenous professors that are now there's targeting for indigenous professors. And so because they're indigenous, the argument is that more resources should go in that direction. And there's all sorts and I'll get into this a little bit at the end in terms of all the various stuff.
Don't want to derail this, but can we go to basics like how do we decide who is indigenous? Because there's some, very high proportion of Canadians must have at least one indigenous ancestor, whether they know it or not. It must be like half or a quarter or something like that. And you can also be, correct me if I'm wrong, or if anyone knows, I know it's the case with some US tribes, that you can induct people in under certain criteria. So they don't have to have any indigenous.
Well, there's lots of debates. The Joseph Boyden controversy, right? That's an example. Sorry,
and it's really interesting because we had, I think it was last week or the week before, but our BBC actually invited one of the forums, but he was an indigenous person, and he was very well spoken, and he had hosted a talk, which was the opposite of yours, it could be said. The title was Why Indigenization is Vital, Indigenization within Pedagogy is Vital to Our Survival. So I was very interested in that, because I am interested in the multifaceted ways of indigenization and how it could be incorporated, or what benefits it, all that. But what he eventually came up with, his conclusion was that even within the indigenous societies, they are split down shared with the rest of the world or not. So when even an Indigenous person who has a talk, hosts a talk in UBC that says, you know, why indigenization within pedagogy is vital to our survival, when he says that the Indigenous society is split in two with aspects of sharing knowledge, like if they aren't clear, how do we as non-Indigenous people even begin to navigate that in any way whatsoever? And I think that adds to the kind of the way that we are kind of, you know, purchasing or like valuing land acknowledgements and all that, if they're not.
But you should not say, you should not say anything.
Yeah.
Because it's really just allow Indigenous people to put forward it, and it's like it's the dominant group that should, you know, just sort of acquiesce is almost sort of the feeling that you get about this. But in terms of Indigenous, like this is a big issue. It used to be you could just say you were Indigenous. If you identified as Indigenous, you could be Indigenous. But of course, that's now encountering all sorts of problems because these, and there's all sorts of discussions that are happening that's amongst Indigenous scholars that, you know, a whole bunch of, you know, quote unquote Indigenous people are now coming in and taking all the jobs. Sort of like so, but then if you turn to do it sort of a racially based kind of idea, then that's like, oh, now you get to the blood quantum kind of idea of, you know, certain amount of blood is going to make you Indigenous. So it just really is a problem that is going to be festering over time. Okay, so this is the major issues that I wanted to talk about. So when we were talking about you know, the threats to inquiry, intimidation of reason, right? This kind of problem that you don't want to, you feel like you don't quite understand it. You want to figure it out, but you think, oh, I better not ask the question because then I could be seen as someone who's not really supportive of the Indigenous education. That's what you get a sense of. So what happens then is all sorts of highly questionable initiatives start to unfold without being subjected to any kind of scrutiny. And this is what's happening. And this is just Mount Royal where this is happening. So, or this is everywhere, but this is, I'm taking my kind of examples from the Mount Royal case. So, Massimo Pinucci, I'm not sure if people are aware of his work, but he's a skeptic, wrote for the Skeptical Inquirer. He came to Mount Royal in 2017 for a panel that I organized after the ill-fated 2016 roundtable. The dean said, yes, this is terrible, we should really get another try at having diverse perspectives being aired. And he came and he was a biologist and a philosopher of science, so really kind of a broad-based kind of view on subjects. And so he was in this panel and he wrote up the session it's on the internet on his Footnotes to Plato blog, and the problem with Indigenous science, and ironic quotation marks, he discovered pretty quickly that there's no there with this Indigenous science. Anyway, so he basically said that, you know, what you're dealing with here is either what's called local knowledge, or all sorts of sort of irrational elements. So, and this is, the local knowledge is, and that's something that everyone has. It's not special. It's not something that Indigenous people have. And it's, you know, if you live in an area for a long time, you're going to know where to go to get various things. And you can tell other people about that. So, you know, if people wanted to come to Calgary, I would probably know how to get around there more than people who haven't been there before. The problem with local knowledge, however, is that it's not systematic. So if you have local knowledge, and this happens with biology, this is a problem for biology, and indigenize biology, and we just had a rumble at General Faculty's Council when they were trying to indigenize the biology degree at Mount Royal, and they had a thing about theirs that they're going to have a course with an elder and knowledge keeper who was going to take students on nature walks and tell them a bunch of things. And so friend of mine, Paul Johnson, was there and he was saying, you know, we can't, just because an elder says something, that doesn't mean it's knowledge. That has to be tested through some kind of rigorous process. and everyone said that the student council head said, that's very offensive for you to be saying this. And our attempts to get this testing, rigorous testing, put into the wording was defeated in General's Faculty's Council. So this is the problem, is that, you know, you can think, and this happens in the North, elders say that there's more polar bears now than there was before. It's like, well, in order to say that, you have to have a systematic methodology, because there could just be more bears that come in because of climate change and the ice melting. And so you've got to have a counting mechanism, you know, you've got to have systematic methodology. So, and local knowledge doesn't have that. So scientific methodology was an advancement over local knowledge, and we're just totally ignoring that in much of the indigenization stuff that happens, especially in the biology degree.
Now, I've read about the problems that scientists have had interacting with indigenous groups regarding those polar bear populations. And I read an article that I was assigned in one of my classes on, it was the history and philosophy of science. And in this article, written by one of my professor's former students, she identified that scientists should adopt a pluralistic approach when dealing with indigenous epistemology, especially indigenous science. So what do you think about the push to get scientists to empathize with indigenous groups as the default? So to respect that they might hold views such as polar bears have an insight into the minds of the indigenous population. They have an ability to read their minds. And scientists are meant to empathize with this. What do you think? What kind of effects might that have?
Well, you know, there's empathizing, which is, you know, I think this is a problem historically, is that, you know, when you're dealing with people who don't understand natural processes, whomever they may be, you know, you want to explain things in a not a belittling fashion. So that's the only thing I would say about, you know, sort of the respect. But in the end, you know, we are allowing this kind of misguided sensitivity to erode scientific research, and that's going to be detrimental to everyone. You know, that's the problem. Is that we can be empathetic in terms of people who don't understand things and they're upset because of all the history that's happened, but we still have to hold on to, you know, the methods that enable us to understand things. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think one of the strategies that's used to try to bring this about is to try to localize what is not local. There's ongoing arguments, and I've been involved in some of them, posing traditional knowledge against European science. Okay? And I have had any number of arguments saying there's no such thing as European science, there's only science and non-science. And it's very hard to get that across and make it stick, right? Science is universal, it's not European, as opposed to traditional knowledge, which is localized, and people who are not living there know very little about what goes on.
Yes.
And a lot of even local knowledge is mythology and oral history, which suffers in being transmitted from mouth to mouth, as we well know from research.
Yeah.
But this basically, this kind of verbiage puts them both on equal standing. Right? There's local knowledge here, and there's local European knowledge over there.
Yeah.
And they're valued, right? There's nothing to choose.
Yes. You know, but I think that one thing that's kind of gotten glossed over in much of this discussion is the, you know, local knowledge, spiritual beliefs, and then, which, you know, local knowledge has some value. The spiritual beliefs in terms of understanding the nature of the universe don't have any value. And then it's the scientific method, which is an advancement over local knowledge. Like, local knowledge can form a part of scientific research, but local knowledge by itself is not, you know, you're not quite sure whether it's actually representative of a wider phenomenon or whether it's a very...
It's a good source of hypotheses that can be tested.
Yes,
scientifically.
that's right. Okay, so anyway, so that's kind of indigenized biology, which, you know, is happening at Mount Royal, even though we tried to, you know, have a rational development there, but it got defeated. Then there is the interesting case of art history at Mount Royal, which was first was developing a course. Spent a lot of time developing this course in art history. And then started to realize, developing the course, that it's a very sensitive area, because many Indigenous people claim that their artworks have some spiritual beliefs are associated with them, and then comes the argument, if you're not Indigenous, you can't teach that, because you're entering into this kind of domain which is forbidden.
So no Michelangelo for Buddhists.
And so, and what happened is the students became so unruly that the course had to be given to an Indigenous professor, because the students said, we don't want to listen to the non-Indigenous person teaching us about, you know, artworks which have some relationship to Indigenous spirituality.
Really, the root of what I would describe as the problem is that it's not about a pursuit of truth. See, when you're talking about hypothesis and this and that and actually counting stuff, you've already assumed that the purpose of the discussion is to pursue a truth that is beyond your level. But I think that in these discussions, really what's happening is it's about people and their power relationships between each other. It's not about something beyond the people. What do you think about it? Like, do you really think that there is any sort of interest in truth? Or?
No, I think it's, as I said, I think it's about money. That's my general thing. Although people probably deluded themselves a little bit into thinking this is really important to themselves, but at the root of it is, you know, about dividing resources within the university. So you were first, and then
Yeah, this sort of addressed the issue that sometimes developed. It's called cultural appropriation. Right, okay. That white folks should be teaching courses in Indigenous history. So I've never heard anybody say that the Indigenous totem pole makers around here shouldn't use chainsaws, modern fans, modern paints, modern chisels. You know, they should be, you know, be digging things out with clamshells and steel chisels. Where does this come from? This notion of cultural appropriation?
well, it sort of goes one way, right? So
Exactly.
it's like, you know, that, and it's really, you know, I think it's about, you know, preserving the jobs and so on for those who have the Indigenous mentality. That's sort of generally.
So it's not moral, just political.
I think it's just, I think that's the roots of it. It's not very consistent.
My question is, why would the separation of resources to those people be such a problem? And how much do you think that stems from the fact that we're in a capitalist society that had historical disproportionate distribution of people amongst classes and essentially exaggerated from capitalism? And how much do you think that, like, do you think that's true? Do you think that's an improper social network? And I would welcome your views on that.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand what you were
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just a little sick, so my head's a little not in the right place. So, okay, I like to say that, like, I would like to assert that I think we're kind of going through a transition period where, like, the power in the hand, power, as you say, over money, or resource distribution is being currently kind of shifted from a semi-monocultural body, whatever the prior kind of dominating force was, whatever you would like to call that. And it's being separated into a diverse group. Now, or at least like that's kind of what we're seeing. That like we're trying to see that transition. People are grabbing power or going for money or resources, as you say. However, I personally don't see an issue with that because with a diverse, with power separated into a diverse group, I believe that it might benefit all of us, in the long run, as if we have power separated into more culturally diverse groups, I would assert that and optimistically assert that we would focus on the commonalities between those diverse groups, and then eventually after that power transition kind of occurs, those common values such as freedom of speech and what have you, the liberal ideals, I guess, will prevail. And my example, I guess, and I don't know how statistically true this is, but and I'm not sure of the data and statistics, but I would like to assert that like equal representation of women in the workplace, for example, might reduce or potentially reduce sexual harassment and assault within the workplace. Because women have power in the workplace, therefore they can then essentially assert themselves and say, hey, this is wrong, you can't do this, and you don't have people protecting each other. And the same will go for the opposite. If you have a completely, if you have a completely 100% woman workplace, maybe there might be some sexual harassment against men. Regardless, splitting power amongst people, which is kind of like the democratic ideal, is essentially what's happening here. It's just like a power transition. What are your thoughts on that? And yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're talking about, and just taking the indigenous
Sure.
as an example,
Yeah.
since this is that if we were able to redistribute jobs and wealth and so on,
Sure.
so that, for example, which is sort of the goal of the identity politics types of arguments,
Yeah.
7% of indigenous people would fill all these different positions, then this would disperse power more within society,
Yeah.
and then kind of allow us to interact more on equal terms than we currently are.
That's my optimistic hope or assertion.
And I think that, I don't think so, because it's getting at the wrong, first of all, many of these arguments are being made on the basis of what's called immutable characteristics, which is things that you can't change. And I do take your point about capitalism, which is that, that's the big issue, which I think identity politics is piggybacked onto, which is that, capitalism does create these huge disparities of wealth and power. And so, but in terms of the capitalist system, if you're able to institute the rule of law and have non-discriminatory sorts of things, you do allow for mobility to take place within, like if you can make a more perfect capitalist system, you can have the more capacity for mobility that exists within that system. Whereas what's happening now with identity politics is that these arguments are being made on the basis of immutable characteristics. So that means that you just need the indigenous medallion or the female medallion or whatever it is, and now you get slotted into this position.
Yeah.
Right? Which then causes all sorts of resentments amongst people who don't have the indigenous medallion or the
Sure.
female medallion.
Probably
So it's
right.
actually, I think it's actually worse, in that it creates the divisions based upon all these immutable characteristics, whereas in the other situation, at least, there was some kind of commonality, although flawed, obviously flawed because of the nature of the capitalist system.
I would like to go further in that and say that but like this whole identity, and this is the way that I think about it, it's just like a transition in the sense of once people feel that they do have their representation in society, it'll essentially be a moot point. Like people will drop the whole identity politics.
I don't think they will, because, and this you see this with the indigenous situation, is that you have the tribal elites, the neo-tribal elites, and the marginalized members of indigenous society. So it creates the division. It just creates, instead of having sort of like, well, in terms of thinking about it from a socialist standpoint, two large groups, the producing group and the owning group. Now you've got all these fragmented groups, all with their producing and owning elements, and so it makes it much more difficult actually to try to move towards a more cooperative society. So I think it's actually reactionary and getting worse.